This piece addresses something uncomfortable for people who read a lot. The relationship between reading widely and making good decisions is far weaker than most readers assume. Reading accumulates information. Making good decisions requires wisdom, the ability to judge which information is relevant, how to weigh competing considerations, and how to act under uncertainty. These are not the same thing, and more reading doesn't automatically produce more wisdom. The paradox is visible everywhere. People who have read extensively about behavioral economics who still make predictable cognitive errors. People who have read multiple books on communication who still avoid difficult conversations. People who have read about investment strategy who still make impulsive trading decisions. The knowledge is there. The application isn't. Understanding why this gap exists is more useful than adding another book to the pile. The first reason, most reading lists are unconsciously curated to confirm existing beliefs. Confirmation bias doesn't just affect what evidence we seek, it affects which books we choose. A person who believes that systems suppress individual potential gravitates toward books about systemic failures. A person who believes hard work is the primary variable gravitates toward success stories that emphasize effort. The reading feels diverse, different authors, different industries, different time periods, while operating within a narrow band of ideological agreement. Breaking out of confirmation bias in reading requires deliberate selection of books that argue the opposite of your current position. Not books that gently complicate it, but books that make the strongest possible case for a view you currently reject. This is uncomfortable reading. Most people do very little of it. But it's the reading that actually has a chance of updating your model rather than reinforcing it. The knowing-doing gap is perhaps the most well-documented failure mode in personal development literature. The gap exists because knowing what you should do and doing it are different cognitive processes. Reading addresses the first. It does almost nothing for the second. You can read every nutrition book ever published and still eat poorly. You can understand every principle of financial management and still spend impulsively. The knowledge is present. The behavior hasn't changed. The knowing-doing gap closes through practice, feedback loops, and accountability structures, not through more information. A person who reads one book on a skill and then immediately practices it will improve faster than a person who reads 20 books and then practices nothing. The information is almost never the rate-limiting factor. The doing is. More reading often functions as a delay mechanism that feels productive while avoiding the uncomfortable practice that would actually produce improvement. Well-read people develop a particular cognitive trap, the ability to articulate arguments they don't actually believe. After encountering enough diverse perspectives, a highly read person can construct a compelling case for almost any position: economic systems, political frameworks, psychological theories. This sounds like intellectual breadth. It can actually be a liability for decision-making. Decision-making requires commitment under uncertainty. The ability to see and articulate 5 sides of a question simultaneously is a genuine cognitive skill, but without the ability to weight those perspectives and act on the weighting, it produces paralysis. Well-read people who have encountered strong arguments on all sides of a question often end up deferring to social pressure. What do people around me think? Because their own judgment feels insufficiently certain. The breadth becomes a source of uncertainty rather than clarity. Real decisions rarely give you time to deliberate with a framework checklist. In actual high-stakes moments, a career decision that needs an answer today, a relationship confrontation that's happening now, a financial choice with a closing window, the analytical process of "let me apply the correct mental model" doesn't work. The model that guides action under pressure is the one that's been practiced to the point of intuition. You can't read your way to that state. You can only practice your way there. Reading as avoidance is the pattern that's hardest to see from inside the experience. Reading about starting a business instead of starting it. Reading about improving relationships instead of having the difficult conversation. Reading about health behaviors instead of changing them. The activity feels unambiguously productive. You're learning, you're investing in yourself, you're taking the problem seriously. But the actual challenge remains safely at a theoretical distance. The insidious quality of reading as avoidance is that it's socially legitimized in a way that most other forms of procrastination are not. You're not wasting time, you're researching. You're not procrastinating, you're preparing. The reading provides genuine intellectual satisfaction, which makes it an effective emotional substitute for the real thing. From the outside, it looks like diligence. From the inside, it feels like diligence. But the outcome is the same as not engaging with the challenge at all. Mental models. The idea that learning a diverse set of frameworks allows cross-domain thinking are genuinely useful. The literature on this is real. Having good mental models does improve judgment, on average, compared to not having them. But the gap between holding a mental model and applying it correctly under pressure is larger than most people who write about mental models acknowledge. A mental model you've read about and understood intellectually behaves differently from a mental model you've applied in a dozen real situations. The second version has been stress-tested against reality. You know not just what the model says, but where it breaks down, what conditions limit its applicability, and what it looks like when it gives the wrong answer. That knowledge comes from application, not from reading more about the model. The reading habits that most reliably improve decision quality. Books that directly contradict your current model of how things work, rather than books that merely extend it. Reading followed by immediate application to a problem you're currently facing. And reading that forces active reconstruction, where you stop before the author gives their conclusion and derive it yourself from their evidence. Then compare your derivation to theirs. Passive reading of well-argued positions is cognitively easy and builds very little. The single most useful habit for improving decision quality, and the one almost no one maintains, a decision journal. Before a significant decision, write down what you're choosing, why you're choosing it, what you predict will happen, and what would cause you to conclude you were wrong. Then return to these entries 6 months or a year later and read them. The experience of being confronted with your own past reasoning, with no ability to revise it in light of what actually happened, is one of the most effective correctives to overconfidence that exists. Seeking disconfirming evidence before committing to a view is another habit that's easy to describe and hard to do consistently. The natural move before a significant decision is to look for evidence that supports the direction you're already leaning. Deliberately inverting this, asking what evidence would make this look like a bad choice, then actively looking for it, is uncomfortable and often produces useful information. Most well-read people skip this step almost every time. The pre-mortem is a related technique. Before a major decision, assume it fails, completely, specifically, in 6 months, and write down why. Not what could go wrong in the abstract, but this failed. Here's the specific chain of events that led to that failure. This exercise surfaces risks that forward-looking optimism tends to suppress, because your mind is operating in a context where failure is already stipulated rather than being treated as a low-probability outcome to be argued away. Accurate feedback loops are the structural factor that separates people who get better at judgment over time from those who don't. If your life is structured so that you can attribute any outcome to luck, market conditions, other people's behavior, or circumstance, you have no accurate information about the quality of your own decisions. Building structures that make the connection between your choices and your outcomes explicit and visible is one of the most important and least glamorous forms of self-improvement available. Finally, the intellectual diversity of your social environment. Most people, even people who read diversely, spend the majority of their social and professional time with people who hold similar fundamental views. Reading books by people with different perspectives is useful. Actually talking regularly with people who hold fundamentally different views, not to debate them, but to understand the internal logic of their position, is a different and often more powerful experience. It's harder to maintain the comfortable certainty that comes from being surrounded by agreement. Summary: reading widely is not the same as thinking clearly. The gap between information accumulation and genuine wisdom is closed by specific practices. Decision journaling with post hoc review, deliberate selection of contradicting perspectives, pre-mortems, disconfirming evidence searches, accurate feedback loops, and intellectual diversity in your social environment. More reading without these practices produces a more articulate version of the same person making the same decisions. Full article at realsyllabus.com.